Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the builders at the wall, Nehemiah chapter 3, in our continuing study of the book of Nehemiah. As we look at Jerusalem, and what you're seeing here is both a topographical map, but also an outline of today's walls. These are the Crusader walls. That wasn't ancient Jerusalem. Here we see in the white line, this was David's city, and this is the part that's being rebuilt in our story. Here's a model that's in Jerusalem today. Now this model reflects the Jerusalem as it would look in New Testament times. But again, just to show you David's city, this is the portion that's going to be in our story today. This is Nehemiah's Jerusalem. There would be maybe houses that extended beyond that, but that's the outline of the walls. So Nehemiah chapter 3 verse 1, then Eliashib, the high priest, arose with his brothers, the priests, and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They consecrated the wall to the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hananel. And thus begins the description of the work with the high priest, who is building in the northeast corner of that circuit of the wall, the part that is next to and just south of the temple. It's my understanding that at this time the walls are going to encompass the temple. So we have in chapter 3 verse 1, and we're not going to go through every single name, but just briefly we have the high priest and his brothers, and they're building the sheep gate and the wall to the Tower of the 100, and then next to them are the Men of Jericho. I just find it interesting that there's Men of Jericho that aren't down in Jericho rebuilding, they're here in Jerusalem. And this is the portion of the city that's closest to Jericho. It's the very northern quadrant. And then our movement's going to take place in a counterclockwise. We're going to just follow the wall. We have Zachar of Imri. Next we have the sons of Hasenaa. They're charged with doing the fish gate, again on the north section of the wall. And then Meremoth and Meshullam and Zadok are presumably next to them, just each one in order. Next there are the Tekoites. We're actually going to see two groups of the Tekoites, but this group in chapter 3 verse 5, there's a notation made that their nobles did not support the work. Already there's a hint of opposition. We're going to see more of that in the next several chapters, but this is the first hint that we have. In chapter 3 verse 6 we have Joiada and Meshullam that are building the old gate, and this is on the northwestern corner of the city. Next we have chapter 3 verse 7, we have Melata the Gibeonite and Jadon, men of Gideon and of Mitzpah, and we're told that they are building the official seat of the governor, which would be again in the vicinity of the temple, the northern side of the city. As we start to move down the western side, we have Uzziel of Harahiah of the goldsmiths. They're building as far as the broad wall. The broad wall, we've actually found elements of this broad wall in modern day Jerusalem, where it's been uncovered. And next to them are Hananiah of the perfumers. I think that had to be a sweet smelling area. We come to chapter 3 verse 9, and there's Raphiah, the son of Hur. I find it interesting, Hur, because there's a novel that came out in the 1800s, written in the 1800s. They've made several movies of it now, called Ben-Hur, son of Hur, and son of the house of Hur. That was a historical person, not that the movie was real, but that they borrowed a Jewish name that dated back to the days of Nehemiah. And there's a notation made that this family and this person was an official of half the district of Jerusalem. So this was an important family. Next, there was Jedaiah, who made repairs opposite his house, and that's going to be sort of commonplace. We're going to see several people that make repairs near to where they live. And then there's Hattush next to him. After that, there is Malchijah Machaiah has another section, and the Tower of Furnaces, and then next to him is Hashub. In chapter 3, verse 12, there's Shallum and his daughters. I think it's wonderful that we have not only sons, but notice there's a reference to daughters that are out there doing the work. Maybe Shallum didn't have any sons, and he's an official of half the district of Jerusalem, just like we saw Rephaiah was the son of Hur. He was an official of half the district of Jerusalem, so apparently this is the other half. And his daughters are taking charge of a section of this wall. Chapter 3, verse 13, we have Hanun and the inhabitants of Zanoah, and they have the valley gate that would lead into that valley that separates, later on became known as the Tyrophian Valley, that is the Valley of the Cheesemakers. Didn't have that name back in Nehemiah's day, but there's a valley that extends between David's city and what would be later Jerusalem to the west. And so there's a gate leading down to that, and 1,000 cubits to the refuse gate. So that's a long extended part of that wall. 1,000 cubits is a long way, where there's no gates, and they could just build the wall, and they are doing that. To the refuse gate, that doesn't sound like a very nice gate. Doesn't sound like a fun gate. We're going to have that refuse gate mentioned in chapter 3, verse 14, where we have Micaiah, the son of Rechab. He's an official of the district of Beth Hacherem, and he's building the refuse gate. Next, chapter 3, verse 15, there's Shallum, the son of Kolhose. He's an official of the district of Mitzpah, and he has the fountain gate and wall of Shalah at the king's garden, as far as the steps that descend from the city of David. So we've actually found some steps. Now, the ones that we found are they're not modern day, but they date more to Christ's day, to the New Testament period. But maybe these were built, along the same path. Well, we're not actually sure. We get to chapter 3, verse 16, and we have a different Nehemiah. That's not Nehemiah who writes this book, or the Nehemiah the governor, but this is Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, and he's building opposite the tombs of David to the artificial pools and house of the mighty men. So this would be the southern end of the city, where the pool of Siloam extends from Hezekiah's tunnel. And next to them are the Levites under Rehum. Chapter 3, verse 17, also there's Nash Abiah. There's a note that he's an official of half the district of Kaliah. There are, chapter 3, verse 18, their brothers under Bawai. He's an official of the other half of the district of Kaliah. So we've got Kaliah well represented in this. And notice, these two officials are working sort of side by side. In chapter 3, verse 19, we have Ezer, son of Jeshua. He's an official of Mitzpah, and he has a section in front of the ascent of armory at the angle. Now, when we refer to the angle, remember the walls have to turn. There's edges, and there's places where they not only angle in, but they might angle out again, and that's a difficult portion to build on because it's not a nice straight wall. Chapter 3, verse 20, we have Baruch, son of Zabai, and we read, and this is the only time we read of a description like this, where he zealously repaired, and he just didn't repair it, he zealously repaired from the angle to the doorway of Eliashib, the high priest. So there's something about Baruch's work that was just a cut above. We have chapter 3, verse 21, Meremoth. He's going from the doorway of Elishib's house to the end of his house. And next come the priests, who are the men of the valley. Chapter 3, verse 23. Benjamin and Hashub repairs to the front of their house. So when possible, we're having people that are working, they're working close to their own homes, where they can sort of take ownership of that. Chapter 3, verse 24, there's Benui, son of Henadad. He's from the house of Azariah to the angle as far as the corner. Next, there is chapter 3, verse 25, Palal. He's in front of the angle and tower from the upper house of the king, and then Pedial, who is next to him. chapter 3, verse 26, and we finally come to the temple servant living in Ophel, and that's from the front of the water gate. Now, the water gate would probably be around the Gihon Spring, that area where that's the northern end of Hezekiah's tunnel, and there's a natural spring that brings water into the city of Jerusalem. So it's from the front of the water gate toward the east and the projecting tower. Verse 20, chapter 3, verse 27, the other Tekoites, and they're doing the projecting tower as far as the wall of Ophel. Chapter 3, verse 28, we have the priests, and they're working above the horse gate, each in front of his house, again, where they can take ownership of that. 329, there's Zadok in front of his house. 329, we have Shemaiah, keeper of the east gate, and that's probably close to where the later east gate would be built, although the east gate that you see today, the eastern gate to the Temple Mount, that's actually much more modern. Even in the New Testament times, there's an older gate that's directly under that gate, and maybe that was even built upon an even older gate. Chapter 3, verse 30, we have Hananiah and Hanun, the sixth son of Zalaph. I find it interesting that, I don't know what happened to the first five sons. Did they not want to work on it? Had they maybe died? Maybe they hadn't. Maybe they weren't around. But we have the sixth son. He gets his name here as one of the workers. Chapter 3, verse 30, Meshullam is working in front of his own quarters. And chapter 3, verse 31, we have Malchiah, one of the goldsmiths. He's working as far as the house of the temple servants and the merchants in front of the inspection gate. As the upper room of the corner, we're coming up now to the northeast corner. And finally we come to where we started, the goldsmiths and the merchants, and they're working between the upper room of the corner and the sheep gate. Remember, we started with the sheep gate, and so we've made a full circuit going in a counterclockwise motion to come back to the sheep gate on the northeastern quadrant. Here's this isn't my illustration, I've borrowed this, but here's a illustration. Notice this map is oriented where the top of the map is pointing to the east, and so we started with the sheep gate, and it's over on our upper left-hand corner, and then we worked our way in a counterclockwise motion as we moved all the way around the city, finally coming to the sheep gate again. This map, notice it takes in the temple complex, and I think that's probably correct at this time in history. In David's old city, the temple wasn't included. That was added later on. Now, I'd like to make a couple of observations from the names that we just read. First of all, there's the listing of the names, and the order reflects a certain amount of organization and planning that took place here. It wasn't just, hey, let's go build a wall and go wherever you want. It was very orderly. It was very methodical, where people were given their assignments, and their assignments worked out in taking into account perhaps where they lived and what part was closest to their homes and things like that. So there's a definite organization that takes place here, and the people worked where they had ownership. And I think there's something special about that, where they took ownership of the work, and we're called to take ownership as well. You see, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 talks about how you also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We're also called to build a wall. We are the wall. You're being built up, and that involves all of us coming together and building up one another. It involves an organization, and it involves taking ownership of that work, because Christ has taken ownership of us.